Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a $40 million aircraft, not your personal sedan. Please return to your seat and let the professionals handle this." The words, spoken by the young first officer over the cabin intercom, were sharp with condescension, a public rebuke meant to quell the rising tide of passenger anxiety with a display of authority. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the cabin. The crowd, desperate for a leader, sided with the uniform, the voice of officialdom. In seat 8A, the woman who had just stood up showed no reaction. She didn't flinch, didn't scowl, didn't offer a single word of defense. Her silence was a deep, unsettling pool in the middle of a raging storm of fear. She simply stood in the aisle, her posture perfect, her hands held loosely at her sides, her gaze fixed on the cockpit door. The flight attendants, faces pale and strained, exchanged frantic glances. They had made the desperate announcement just moments before. Both the captain and the relief pilot were incapacitated, struck down by a violent and sudden illness. They had asked, with voices trembling on the edge of breaking, if there was a licensed pilot on board. And this woman, this unassuming figure with silver hair tied in a neat bun and reading glasses perched on her nose, had been the only one to answer the call. But when the lead flight attendant saw the way her eyes scanned the cabin, not with fear, but with a calm, methodical assessment of the exits and the state of the passengers, she felt a flicker of something other than terror. It was a profound and inexplicable sense of stability. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type "competence" in the comments below. The first officer, a man named Davies, was barely out of his 20s, his face a mask of brittle confidence layered over sheer panic. He saw a grandmother, a civilian, a liability. His prejudice was a shield against the terrifying reality that he was now, for all intents and purposes, alone and out of his depth. He repeated his command, his voice sharper this time. "Ma'am, I am not going to ask you again. Sit down." Now, the woman in the aisle finally moved, but not toward her seat. She took one deliberate step forward, her simple walking shoes making no sound on the carpet. She met the lead flight attendant's gaze and spoke for the first time. Her voice was low, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. "My name is Eva Rostova. I hold an airline transport pilot license with multi-engine and instrument ratings. I have over 22,000 hours of flight time. You need to let me into that cockpit." Her words were not a request, they were a statement of fact, delivered with the flat finality of a pilot reading a pre-flight checklist. The flight attendant, caught between the first officer's public tirade and the woman's unshakable calm, made a decision. She nodded, her own fear momentarily eclipsed by the sheer force of Rostova's presence. As Eva passed, she produced a worn, heavily laminated FAA license from her purse. Davies would later scoff at its age, at the faded photograph of a much younger woman, never realizing he wasn't looking at a piece of history, but at a living testament to a legacy forged in arenas he couldn't possibly imagine. The moment Eva Rostova slipped into the right-hand seat of the cockpit, the atmosphere changed. The space, which seconds before had been a chamber of escalating panic filled with Davies' frantic, shallow breaths, became something else entirely. It became a sanctuary of professional focus. The cacophony of alarms and warning chimes seemed to dim, not because they ceased, but because she simply filtered them out, her attention zeroing in on the primary flight display with an intensity that was almost palpable. Her hands, wrinkled and elegant, moved with a grace that belied her age. They didn't dart or tremble, they flowed across the instrument panel, each touch deliberate, each action part of a silent, deeply ingrained rhythm. She strapped herself in, donned the headset, and her fingers danced over the controls, adjusting trim, checking fuel flow, and assessing the aircraft's energy state. Davies watched, frozen, as she absorbed a tidal wave of critical data in seconds. He had been staring at the same screens, seeing only chaos and impending doom. She looked at them and saw a problem, a complex equation with a finite number of solutions. She had not come to fly the plane with hope or prayer, she had come to solve it with brutal, elegant competence. The aircraft shuddered, hitting a pocket of turbulence, and Davies flinched. Eva's expression didn't change. Her focus was absolute, a silent rebuke to his fear, a demonstration that true control wasn't about raising your voice, but about lowering your heart rate. The airliner was bleeding altitude, caught in a treacherous downdraft on the edge of a violent weather system that Davies had been trying to clumsily navigate around. "We have to climb. Full power," he shouted, his voice cracking. Eva ignored him. Her eyes were on the weather radar, her mind calculating vectors and wind shear with a speed that felt inhuman. Instead of fighting the storm, she yielded to it. In a move that defied every instinct in Davies' recently trained mind, she banked the aircraft toward the darkest part of the storm cell, a maneuver of such audacious precision that it felt like suicide. But she had seen something he had not, a narrow, transient corridor of calm air, a river in the sky that would allow them to ride the storm's energy instead of breaking against it. For a terrifying minute, the plane was tossed violently, the wings groaning under the strain. Davies gripped his seat, his knuckles white, certain they were moments from disaster. Then, just as suddenly, the turbulence ceased. They were through. The ride smoothed out into an impossibly gentle glide. The alarms fell silent. The red warning lights blinked out one by one as she systematically stabilized every system. In the deafening silence that followed, punctuated only by the steady hum of the engines, Davies stared at her. "How, what was that?" he whispered, his arrogance completely shattered and replaced by a raw, profound awe. Eva didn't look at him. Her eyes remained on the horizon. "It's called threading the needle," she said, her tone as placid as if she were discussing the weather in a garden. "Now, get me oceanic control on the radio. Tell them we are declaring an emergency and diverting." On the ground, at the airline's sprawling operations center, the call sent a shockwave through the room. The initial report was grim: a transatlantic flight, 300 souls on board, both senior pilots incapacitated, and an unknown civilian at the controls. The director of flight operations, a grizzled veteran named David Carmichael, listened to the exchange with a knot tightening in his stomach. The first officer sounded like a terrified child. But the woman's voice, there was something about it. The cadence was perfect. The terminology was flawless. The calm was unnatural. "Get me her name," Carmichael ordered. "Patch me through to the cockpit." Now, when the flight attendant relayed the name, Eva Rostova, Carmichael went completely still. He repeated it under his breath, a ghost of a memory stirring in the back of his mind. "Rostova." He turned to his deputy. "Run that name. Run it through the military pilot registry. Look for Air Force, Special Operations. Cross-reference with FAA master records from the 70s and 80s." As the keys clattered, Carmichael's voice, now patched directly into the cockpit, was steady and authoritative. "First Officer Davies, this is Director Carmichael. Report your status." Davies, still shaken, stammered out the situation, ending with, "and a passenger, a civilian named Eva Rostova, has taken control." A voice came from Carmichael's deputy in the background, hushed and urgent. "Sir, you need to see this." Carmichael's eyes widened as he read the file that flashed onto his screen. The worn, laminated license suddenly made sense. The impossible calm was no longer a mystery, it was a signature. He took a deep breath, his voice now imbued with a tone of profound, undeniable reverence that filled the small cockpit and silenced every other thought in Davies' head. "First Officer Davies," he said, the words slow and deliberate, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are not in the presence of a civilian. You are in the presence of a legend." He began to read from the screen, his words painting a portrait of a life lived at the apex of professional skill. "You are sharing a flight deck with Colonel Eva Spectre Rostova, United States Air Force, retired. Her last active command was the 4th Special Operations Squadron. Her primary aircraft was the AC-130 Uspooky gunship and the MC-130 Combat Talon. She has over 9,000 hours of combat flight time in contested airspace." He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. "She didn't just fly transport planes, son. She flew them at treetop level, at night, in zero visibility, to insert and extract Tier 1 assets from hostile territory. She wrote half the emergency protocols in your training manual. The maneuver she just performed to get you through that storm. It's not in any commercial textbook because no commercial pilot would ever have the nerve to try it. Carmichael's final words were an order delivered with the force of a hammer strike. First officer, your only duty right now is to be her co-pilot. Give her whatever she asks for, without question. You are looking at the finest pilot I have ever known. Do you understand? Davies, utterly humbled, could only whisper a single, choked word. Yes, sir. The rest of the flight unfolded not as an emergency, but as a masterclass. A cascade of secondary failures, starting with a hydraulic leak, would have doomed a lesser pilot. For Rostova, it was merely another variable in the equation. She talked to air traffic control with a serene clarity, calmly explaining her intention to perform a dead stick landing, bringing the massive airliner in with minimal power and no hydraulic assistance, a feat of pure aerodynamic skill considered nearly impossible in a modern jet. The emergency crews at JFK Airport scrambled, preparing for the worst, their minds filled with images of catastrophe. But as the plane broke through the clouds, it was clear this was something different. It wasn't crashing, it was descending with an unearthly grace. It floated toward the runway, perfectly aligned, its speed bleeding off with calculated precision. The touchdown was so gentle, so impossibly soft, that for a moment the passengers were not even sure they were on the ground. The aircraft rolled to a perfect stop exactly on the centerline, as if placed there by an invisible hand. In the tower, controllers lowered their binoculars, stunned into silence. They had not witnessed a successful emergency landing. They had witnessed a work of art. The story became instantaneous legend, transmitted through hushed, reverent tones across ATC frequencies and in airport crew rooms long before the plane's doors were even opened. In the aftermath, the world clamored for a hero. News crews swarmed the airport, desperate for a glimpse of the Angel of 8A. But Eva Rostova was gone. She slipped away, not through the cheering crowds, but through a quiet service exit, assisted by an airport manager who was an old Air Force veteran and recognized the look in her eyes, the quiet professional's deep-seated aversion to fanfare. She left behind nothing but a meticulously detailed, handwritten debrief for the NTSB, a document so precise and insightful that it would be studied for years. The only public figure was First Officer Davies. In a press conference, his face was a portrait of humility. He was a changed man. I made an assumption, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I saw her age, I saw a woman, and I saw a civilian. I didn't see her competence. I didn't see the giant sitting in seat 8A. She didn't just save our lives, she taught me that respect is not something you demand with a uniform, it's something you earn with your actions. I will spend the rest of my career trying to be half the pilot she was in those 2 hours. The story spread like wildfire, a modern myth born in the crucible of near disaster. In pilot forums and online groups, the legend of Eva Rostova became a parable about the dangers of arrogance and the quiet, undeniable power of demonstrated skill. Months later, the culture at the airline began to shift. A new training program was unveiled at their flight academy, mandatory for all new pilots. It was called the Rostova Protocol. It was a curriculum built around her debrief, focusing on calm, methodical crisis management, on seeing the entire problem before reacting, on trusting instruments over instinct, and on the vital importance of CRM, crew resource management. Its most passionate advocate and lead instructor was a humbled and dedicated pilot named Davies. He used his own story, his own moment of profound ignorance, as the program's opening lesson. He taught his students to look beyond the superficial, to seek out competence in whatever form it took, and to understand that the most valuable asset in a crisis might be the quietest person in the room. The legacy of Eva Rostova wasn't a statue or a plaque with her name on it. Her legacy was in the next generation of pilots, men and women who were taught to value substance over style, silence over noise, and precision over posture. It was a living legacy, woven into the very fabric of how they were taught to fly, a constant reminder that the greatest strength is often invisible to the arrogant eye. The tale of Flight 712 became folklore, a story told to rookies to teach them the most important lesson of all: assumptions are the enemy of survival. The seat, 8A, was never formally retired, but a quiet understanding spread among the flight crews. It was often left empty on transatlantic routes, a silent monument to the day a living legend reminded them all what it truly meant to be a professional. The real triumph wasn't just the miraculous landing, it was the powerful, enduring lesson it imprinted on an entire industry. It proved that true authority is not derived from a title or a uniform, but from the quiet confidence born of thousands of hours of disciplined practice. It was a testament to the fact that competence is its own credential, and that skill, when demonstrated with undeniable clarity, will always silence the voices of prejudice and doubt. Eva Rostova never sought the spotlight, because she didn't need it. Her actions had spoken with a thunderous clarity that no words could ever match, a legacy not of what she said, but of what she did. It's a reminder that in the moments that matter most, the world is not saved by the loudest voice in the room, but by the steadiest hand. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where practiced skill defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.